The bed that held Europe hostage. What happens when the most powerful marriage in the world produces nothing? Not a child, not intimacy, not even certainty. In Versailles, there was a room more politically dangerous than the throne itself. Not the council chamber, not the hall of mirrors, the royal bed. Every night, as candles dimmed and doors closed, something far more important than privacy was being tested. Because by morning, Europe would ask the same question again, quietly, obsessively, relentlessly. Had it happened? Marie Antoinette arrived in France as a living treaty. 14 years old, stripped of her Austrian identity at the border, bathed, dressed, renamed and delivered like a ceremonial object to the Bourbon court. Her body was no longer her own. It belonged to the future of France. Louis Auguste, Dauphin of France, was 16. He had been raised not in warmth, but in ceremony, not in affection, but in surveillance. He learned early that every movement was judged, every weakness recorded. Emotion was dangerous, desire was undisciplined. Silence felt safer. They were married beneath chandeliers and applause, surrounded by gold so heavy it seemed eternal. The court celebrated as if history itself had been secured. But the bed remained untouched. At Versailles, nothing stayed private, not even absence. Servants noticed what did not change. Physicians speculated without examining. Courtiers leaned closer to one another in hallways, their whispers carrying more weight than official decrees. Foreign ambassadors sent letters home that read like autopsies written too early. Was the Dauphin physically incapable? Was the Queen frightened, repelled, unprepared? Was the Bourbon dynasty, already aging, already brittle, sliding quietly toward extinction? In Vienna, the panic was immediate. Empress Maria Theresa understood exactly what was at stake. She did not write as a mother. She wrote as a ruler. Her letters to Marie Antoinette were blunt, invasive, desperate, instructions on intimacy delivered like military orders, because this was not about love. This was about continuity. A royal marriage without consummation was not a private failure. It was a political vacuum. Without an heir, alliances weakened, rivals recalculated, legitimacy thinned. The throne began to feel provisional, and so Europe watched a bed it could not see, imagining catastrophe in the darkness. The silence between two young bodies became louder than cannon fire. It invited satire, suspicion, and eventually cruelty. Marie Antoinette felt it first. Every smile was scrutinized. Every laugh was interpreted as guilt. Her youth, once celebrated, now looked suspicious. Her foreignness, once tolerated, now felt threatening. Louis Auguste retreated further inward. The more he was watched, the more he froze. The bed became a stage, and he had never learned how to perform. Locks and mechanisms made sense to him. Human expectation did not. What no one admitted, what no court document ever recorded, was the simplest truth of all. They were afraid of failure, afraid of ridicule, afraid of confirming what everyone already suspected. And in the Crownless realm, fear is never passive. It accumulates. It reshapes perception. It turns delay into destiny. Long before the revolution found its voice, long before pamphlets sharpened their knives, the monarchy had already begun to fracture, quietly, intimately, in a candlelit room where nothing happened and everything changed. Part 2. Impotence, Whispers, and the Politics of Humiliation. By the second year of the marriage, silence had become impossible to ignore. Versailles thrived on movement, ceremonies, processions, conversations that never truly ended. But one absence refused to disappear. No announcement, no pregnancy, no heir. What began as curiosity hardened into suspicion. The Dauphin's body became a subject of public imagination. Men who had never seen him undressed spoke with confidence about his anatomy. Doctors who had never examined him debated causes in salons lit by candle smoke and arrogance. A king's potency, once assumed by divine right, was now treated as an unresolved question. Impotence was no longer a medical concern, it was a political accusation, because a ruler unable to act in the most intimate domain appeared dangerously unfit to act anywhere else. The logic was cruel, but it was persuasive. If Louis Auguste could not master his own body, how could he master France? Marie Antoinette stood at the centre of this storm, exposed without having done anything at all. Each day without pregnancy sharpened her visibility. She was watched as one watches a clock that refuses to move. Her body was expected to explain the future. At court, sympathy evaporated quickly. Queens were not allowed the luxury of confusion. Her youth was dismissed, her discomfort mocked. If something was wrong, it must be her fault, or her corruption. Whispers multiplied. Some claimed the king avoided her bed out of revulsion. Others suggested he preferred solitude, or worse, humiliation disguised as a virtue. Satirical songs circulated quietly at first, then openly. They did not need evidence, they needed repetition. Louis Auguste withdrew further. Shame is not loud, it is enclosing. The more he sensed judgment, the more he delayed action. He found refuge in routine. Hunting, locksmithing, endless hours with objects that did not demand success. Marie Antoinette responded differently. Isolation sharpened her need for escape. She laughed too loudly. She danced too freely. Her joy, once charming, began to look like defiance. Every smile was interpreted as mockery, every pleasure as betrayal. Europe watched this tension with clinical interest. Austria worried its daughter was becoming expendable. Prussia calculated advantage. England observed, amused by the slow decay of its rival. A monarchy without heirs was a monarchy without future, and futures invite interference. The bed, still untouched, became a symbol far larger than either of them. It represented paralysis, delay, the inability to cross from expectation into action. And the cruel irony was this: the longer the marriage remained unconsummated, the more difficult consummation became. The act itself grew heavy with consequence. What should have been natural became monumental. Failure now meant confirmation of every rumour. In the crownless realm, humiliation does not remain contained. It seeps outward, infecting perception, rewriting identity. A king becomes weak not when he fails, but when everyone believes he already has. By the time Louis XVI inherited the throne, the damage was no longer private. The question of his body had merged with the question of his authority, and France began to sense something terrifying. The man who now ruled them did not move decisively, not in bed, not in council, not in crisis. What had once been a whispered curiosity was hardening into a narrative, and narratives once believed become more powerful than truth. Part 3. The Queen becomes the crime. When silence lasts long enough, it demands a culprit. By the third and fourth years of the marriage, Versailles no longer asked whether something was wrong. It had already decided who was to blame: Marie Antoinette. She had arrived as a solution, youthful, fertile, politically valuable. Now she was reinterpreted as a problem. Her body, once celebrated as promise, became evidence in an unspoken trial. A queen who did not produce children was not neutral. She was dangerous. Courtiers studied her movements the way theologians once studied heresy. Every laugh was dissected. Every gesture toward pleasure was reclassified as moral decay. If the bed remained untouched, then the queen must be cold, perverse, or corrupt, because the alternative, that the king himself was incapable, was unthinkable. So blame migrated toward the visible. Marie Antoinette sought relief where she could find it: music, games, theatres, private rooms where etiquette loosened its grip. She surrounded herself with youth, colour, motion. Anything that reminded her she was alive and not merely waiting. But Versailles does not forgive vitality in women. Her laughter became scandal. Her gowns became provocation. Her friendships became conspiracies. The more she tried to escape scrutiny, the more scrutiny defined her. Pamphlets began to circulate, at first crude, then vicious. They depicted her as sexually deviant, manipulative, insatiable. None of it required proof. Absence was enough. The unconsummated marriage became a blank page on which fantasy could write freely. Louis XVI watched this transformation with quiet horror. He did not defend her, not publicly, not decisively. To do so would have required confrontation, and confrontation terrified him. His silence was not cruelty, it was paralysis. But silence, when power demands action, is indistinguishable from betrayal, the court noticed. The people would later notice too. The cruelest part was this: Marie Antoinette was being punished for an intimacy that did not exist. She was accused of excess precisely because nothing had happened. In the crownless realm, emptiness is never allowed to remain empty. It is filled with accusation. As years passed, the narrative hardened. The Queen was no longer unlucky. She was unnatural, foreign, dangerous. The absence of heirs became symbolic of everything France feared: stagnation, decay, loss of direction. And so, the bed that had once merely been silent now felt accusatory. It stood as proof of something rotten, something unresolved at the heart of the monarchy. Power depends on belief, and belief, once fractured, does not require evidence to collapse. By the time whispers reached the streets beyond Versailles, the Queen had already been convicted in the public imagination, not for what she had done, but for what she had not. Part 4. When the bed opens, but power does not. Eventually, the silence broke. After years of pressure, intervention, and humiliation disguised as concern, the marriage was consummated. No announcement echoed through Versailles, but relief spread quietly, like news too fragile to celebrate aloud. Doctors were satisfied, mothers reassured, diplomats exhaled, and yet nothing truly changed, because by the time the bed finally served its purpose, the damage had already escaped it. Marie Antoinette would bear children. The Bourbon line technically survived. On parchment, the crisis was resolved. But power does not recover simply because biology complies. Legitimacy, once weakened, does not heal at the same pace as flesh. The court had already learned a dangerous habit: doubting the king. Louis XVI had spent years proving one thing with absolute consistency. He delayed. He avoided confrontation. He hoped problems would dissolve on their own if left untouched long enough. The bed had taught Versailles this lesson before politics ever did. When financial strain tightened around France, hesitation returned. When ministers argued, decisions stalled. When unrest murmured beyond the palace gates, reassurance replaced action. The king, who had once been whispered about in bedrooms, was now whispered about in council chambers. Marie Antoinette, meanwhile, could not reclaim what had been taken from her. Motherhood did not erase suspicion. It only changed its form. If she was no longer barren, she was extravagant. If no longer sexually suspect, then politically dangerous. She retreated further from the court that had consumed her youth. Private estates, smaller circles, moments of artificial freedom designed to imitate normality. But these retreats looked like secrecy to those already primed to distrust her. Every attempt at privacy became evidence of guilt. Philosophers would later write that authority must act decisively to survive. Machiavelli warned that hesitation invites contempt. The tragedy of Louis XVI was that he embodied the opposite lesson. His reign taught France that uncertainty could live at the centre of power. The revolution did not begin with hunger or ideology. It began with disbelief. Disbelief that the monarchy could respond. Disbelief that it understood reality. Disbelief that it deserved obedience. And that disbelief had been rehearsed for years, first in whispers about a bed, then in doubts about a crown. By the time anger erupted, the image of weakness was already complete. The king who could not act quickly enough, the queen who could not escape her myth. The private failure of her marriage had become a public expectation of collapse. In the crownless realm, power is not destroyed in a single moment. It erodes, it loses credibility, it teaches its enemies patience. The bed had opened, but authority never did. Part 5. The bed remembered, the throne forgotten. By the time the revolution arrived, the marriage no longer mattered. The bed no longer mattered. Even the children no longer mattered. What mattered was the story that had already been told, and believed. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette were no longer judged as individuals but as symbols. He was weakness made flesh. She was corruption given a face. The years of silence, delay, and humiliation had prepared France to accept a simple conclusion. This monarchy did not deserve to survive. When pamphlets flooded Paris, they did not begin with politics. They returned obsessively to the body, to sex, to failure, to ridicule. The Queen was drawn as grotesque, insatiable, monstrous. The King as passive, inert, almost absent. Reality no longer had a voice. Myth had replaced it. At the trial, Marie Antoinette was accused of crimes so absurd they bordered on madness. But the crowd did not need coherence, they needed confirmation. She had already been condemned years earlier, when the bed remained silent and the court chose to interpret fear as guilt. Louis XVI met death the same way he had met power, hesitantly, without fury, without clarity, without the authority to reshape the narrative that had consumed him. And so the dynasty ended not with a roar, but with a memory of delay, a memory of silence, a memory of a marriage that could not perform under the weight of expectation. In the crownless realm, this is the final truth. Power is not overthrown only by violence. It is undone when belief erodes, when confidence decays, when hesitation becomes identity. The French monarchy did not fall because the bed was empty. It fell because the world learned to doubt what stood behind it. And once doubt replaces reverence, no crown can survive. If this story revealed something unsettling about power, fear, and the myths we choose to believe, subscribe to Crownless Realm. Because history is not ruled by kings and queens alone, it is ruled by what we whisper about them, long before they fall.